What is the most fucked up thing you've seen your parents do? When I was maybe 13, my cousin had a baby and my mom went over to my nana's house to wait for the baby with a butcher knife. She was going to stab my cousin's newborn because she thought it was the Antichrist. Stepmom purposely falsely accused me twice of stealing from her. First time she told me she was going to do it to get my dad to cut off paying for my college and kick me out. It worked. Second time she accused me of what would have been a felony amount to try to get me thrown in jail. Luckily it didn't work out for her that time. My dad intentionally set his hand on fire to demonstrate that whatever fluid he was using burns with a cold flame. He was normally a very smart, level-headed person. I swear. My parents go in an argument, like I'm sure a lot of couples do, but it just kept escalating, voices raising. Eventually it ended up in screaming match. My mom took the phone off the hook and threw it at my dad. He caught it just before it hit his face and then he got right in my mom's face and screamed at her. She then started smacking him and screaming at him. At the time I thought that was how couples argued. Then I saw my wife's parents get in an argument. She said it was one of the worst she had ever seen, and they were barely 1/10th of the yelling my parents had gotten. Anyway, this has led to a lot of issues with my wife. She thinks I'm yelling at her when I'm, in my mind, barely raising my voice. She always thought I was crossing a line, while I thought I was holding back. Then about 6 months ago she saw my mom and I get in a fight. I'm not even sure what it was over, but I had to resort to yelling to get my point across and catching random shit she threw at me. After that my wife understood that when I get stern and don't yell, and don't throw shit, I'm holding back. I'm trying the hardest to not end up like my mom. When I was a little kid, probably around 10, my mom told me to send her checkbooks in the mail that belonged to my grandmother. My mom didn't live with us and she told me that my grandmother had asked me to send them since she was out of town. So I did. I later got sat down by my grandmother and she was furious with me for sending the books. My mother had apparently done this in order to commit fraud and had drained my grandmother's life savings from close to $1 million down to nothing. I got blamed for it until my grandmother passed away. One of her last conversations with me at age 24 was her still expressing her disappointment in me for sending the books. My mother denies the whole thing to this day. My parents gave my older sister up to child services because they didn't want to take care of her anymore. I have really low blood pressure and high anxiety stress. This was also when I was struggling with an eating disorder and hardly ate anything. I got into an argument with my mother about something incredibly stupid. Probably about how I left a crumb on the counter when I wiped it down or something, and started telling my mother I felt faint and was struggling to stand. My mom screamed at me to leave her room and get ready for school. I left her room and promptly fainted, hitting my head on the corner of a wall and knocking myself out cold. When I woke up minutes later I couldn't move my legs or my arms and began screaming for my mom to help me, sobbing loudly and begging for her to help. My mom opened the door, looked down at my crying, begging body unable to move on the floor, and said "You're always so fucking dramatic," before slamming the door in my face. I'm going to bypass the dark shit and relate one I find hilarious to this day. Most of my friends avoided coming to my front door. My dad was scary shit. One of my good guy friends, however, was so mellow and unfazed by literally anything. He would knock on the door as opposed to my window. He was around 6 feet 5 inches and goofy looking. So, he decided to dye his hair bright manic panic green, and his eyebrows. It was raining out. He knocked on our front door and my dad opened it. He stared, silently, for nearly a minute, taking in the full effect of my giant green buddy whose skin was now quite green too. My dad was really stoned, as opposed to the more typical less mellow things he usually went for. Finally, he just came and got me and said, "Underpants bandit, there's a jolly green giant here to see you," and left the room. The next day he asked if, in fact, my buddy was actually the jolly green giant or if he was hallucinating. My mum cheated on my dad when I was 5 years. I remember seeing the guy and mum saying "Don't tell dad." To save the marriage they moved states and my dad still kept his same job, $150K salary in the 90s, and came home in the weekends. Of course mum found someone else to cheat with while dad was at work. He got her all the new cars and started her a business, but still she was committed to cheating. They divorced. My father strapped fireworks to me at a family barbecue, and recorded me as I ran around, frantically screaming whilst trying to remove them as my entire extended family cheered and hooted with laughter. I think it was probably sitting in a chair with a wooden spoon when I was about 5, screaming at me to come to her so she could beat me with it. The kind of scream where they turn red in the face. Their expression is so distorted it barely looks human. Their throat gets so tight from the level of screaming they sound different. I just remember standing there in front of her crying and frozen. When I didn't go to her, she started hitting herself with the wooden spoon on her leg, screaming as she did it. When it snapped in half on her leg, she started hitting herself and pulling at her own hair. She had a wooden spoon-shaped bruise perfectly shaped out on her leg, and I remember a few days later when I saw it and said something, she said, "That's because of you. That's what you did." I'm pretty sure it was because I didn't want her to brush my hair. I can't really remember. My brother never experienced any of this. I always copped it when I was home alone with her. But out of everything she ever said to me, and still does, that was the most fucked thing I've seen her do. My sister and I had a bed in my mother's room. She slept with her boyfriend on that bed. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw them having sex. Another time, I had woken up and gone downstairs, asked her boyfriend, the same one from earlier, where my mother was. He lifted up his chin and there was a cut all the way across his neck. I later found out that my mom went to jail for 27 days. I've also seen my mom going after my current stepfather with a knife. Good thing we had a roommate. When I was in 3rd, maybe 4th grade, I was crying in my room on the bed because my mom wouldn't let me go to a neighbor's house. She then proceeded to take a pillow from my bed and hold it over my face, attempting to suffocate me. Luckily, I was smart enough to hold my arms over my face to keep her from doing it. I still hate her for that till this day, and I'm 16. She wonders why I don't love her the way I do my dad. When I was 21, I flew to Australia to live for 2 years. About 8 months into my stay, my father admitted to me that he had been working under my name and SIN number, working at a job that prior to his employment, needed to do a credit check. He didn't have good credit, so apparently he had got my SIN number and other documents prior to me leaving and took photos. My stepdad threatened to kick me and my sister out of the house along with all do our stuff if my mom left on a business trip that would secure her job and make her self-dependent. I told her to leave because it was important that she go and do this for herself. He indeed kicked us out after I came back from the airport. He took the ski rack he helped buy off the car, and moved all of the furniture, throwing anything in a public space or their room into the garage or my sister's room. I began secretly loading the car with essentials like our personal files and birth certificates. I also grabbed the PS4 he bought me to prevent him from abusing my account. My puppy was still on worms treatments, but he said he would take her back if we left her, so we had to put her in her crate where she had bad diarrhea. I took essential clothes and school stuff and tried to take my violin. However, he spotted me when I went to head downstairs and ran in front of me. I had paid for half of the $1,500 instrument, but he helped pay for the rest and claimed it was his. I tried to keep it from him, which became a wrestling match between my 5'4", 117-pound self and his 220-pound 6-featuring self. He eventually reached past me and grabbed the strap, ripping the handle I was holding off of the case. We left shortly after, seeking refuge at neighbors for 3 days. I had to hide my car in a parking lot a ways away so he wouldn't try to steal it. I did eventually get the violin back, but he destroyed our house and put a 3-inch radius hole in the stairway wall, and kicked and punched the bathroom door in my mom's room, destroying it and ripping it off the hinges. I have never been so terrified of a guardian before. She got divorced from him a month later. Edit. TLDR. My stepdad kicked me and my sis out of the house, taking a lot of our stuff, while my mom was out of town. My parents divorced when I was 7. My father died when I was in my early 20s. He left me $5 in his will. That was fine. I wanted nothing to do with him from the time I was 7. The courts revoked his visitation when I was 13. I saw him 3 times from a distance between 13 and 18 and didn't speak to him. We never got in contact again. My mom wanted me to get a lawyer, contest his will and turn over the money to her because she felt she was due on account of her crappy marriage and lousy divorce settlement. Her sisters agreed. My dad has very bad road rage. When I was about 8, he got us into an accident on purpose just to get back at the person for getting into the turning lane in front of the neighborhood he was trying to get out of. My dad swerved in front of traffic and hit the guy from behind. I still hate being in the car with him. I remember them having sex on the kitchen counter behind us while we were having breakfast before school. One year they got a massive tub of chocolate as they were into eating foods off each other, but they hated it. So us kids had chocolate body spread sandwiches for nearly a year. It was a huge tub. When they got into fights it would turn into a throwing match. My mum dented the double glazed window with a frying pan. It is possible, and to this day, at least 15 years later, she still has the pan in question. They'd once redecorated the lounge, and about a week later were so drunk they got into an argument which resulted in my mum throwing her plate of salad at my stepdad, getting mayo and lettuce leaves on the wall, and I vaguely remember it still being stuck to the wall 6 months later. When my stepdad fell asleep on the sofa downstairs, she'd turn the Bible channel on, or any other religious channel, put the TV on full blast and take the remote to bed with her so he couldn't change it.